15 past the hour. So welcome to our roundtable discussion with coaches and umpires sitting at the same table. And of course, a topic that everybody always enjoys is how to communicate amongst our coaches and umpiring when we're all on the field together. It's a marriage made of heaven if we can communicate well. Sometimes it doesn't always go so well. So we have representing the umpire side, we have, of course, Scott McLaren and Frankie Billingsley, and they have two guests that they would love to introduce as well that will represent the coaching side. We got three even?
We convinced three coaches to come visit with us.
Well, this is insane, but I tell you what, it'll be a great discussion. So introduce your coaches and let's have a great roundtable discussion around communication.
Thank you, Brent. All right, Frankie, you get the first introduction.
Oh, okay. I'm very pleased to introduce Mike Hyrynenko, who is probably no stranger to any slow pitch umpire on the call. Even though he has spent his career in Alberta, he has traveled all over the country and North America. So Mike's been in the game of softball for over 30 years. He's played, coached, and volunteered. His playing and coaching days started in '91 and his volunteering days started in 2010. But of notable reference, Softball Canada Canadian Championship gold medalist in 2013 and 15, a bronze medalist in 2016, and a silver medalist in 2018, and was part of the coaching staff for the Team Canada Border Battle team in 2017, 18, and 19. Super excited to have Mike here. We tried to get him for an Alberta virtual clinic years ago, and or actually an in-person clinic, and it was canceled. So very, very nice to have you here, Mike.
All right, thank you, Frankie. Welcome, Mike. Great to have you. Hyrynenko, I practiced. I didn't even have to do it, but I practiced. It's all right. So we'll introduce our two other coaches. First, living her personal nightmare of being in a room full of umpires is Elissa Sivel, who is the chairperson of the Softball Ontario Can Pitch Committee and sits on the Softball Canada Can Pitch Committee as well. She has won the Ottawa Sports Award for softball in 2018 for her success with the Bytown Bells and has led that team to several top finishes at the multiple provincial championships. She's competed at 8 Canadian championships with several teams and represented the University of Ontario for 7 years. And not like I would have represented for 7 years. She actually got 2 degrees out of it. So she's, as they say, wicked smart. And she has worked with athletes of all ages and a master pitching instructor for Softball Ontario and is one of the head coaches of the University of Ottawa women's softball team, an active athlete, and coaches a U12 select team in Unionville and is a competition development trained coach. So welcome to your nightmare. And our third panelist, my natural adversary in life, Mr. Scott Searle. Scott is a master coach developer with Softball Canada and sits on the Softball Canada Coach Development Committee, as well as being one of our board of directors. He's facilitated over 80 clinics across Canada in the last 10 years and won the 2019 Community Coach Developer of the Year Award from the Coaching Association of Canada. He is currently the head coach of Team Ontario that is preparing for the 2020 2022 Canada Summer Games, and was the assistant coach in 2017 when the team won gold. Has coached at over 10 national championships at various levels and 4 ISC World Championships. He is a You Can Play ambassador, a graduate of the National Coaching Institute, a fully certified level 4 coach, and is known across the land for his baking prowess. So welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
I'll have to turn your microphones on now because this is a roundtable discussion. And I'll let everybody in the audience know, we are really looking forward to any of your questions or input. This isn't by no means just the 5 of us chatting. We do have some things we'd like to cover, but if any time you have a question or a comment or a thought or query, this is a tremendous opportunity to talk to 3 very high-level coaches with a wide variety of experience across both our disciplines of play. So let's get started. We're going to ask each of the coaches 2 questions. Each can answer the same question. The first question for all 3 of you is, what is one thing that you don't like from an umpire on the field when you go to a game?
They're all going to say only one.
Well,
I don't
I
think we got
wanted
that
to
kind of
reduce it
time.
to time. I'm sure we could have gone to a list of 10.
I'm just.
Searle's been writing for like a month about his list of various grievances.
No, I've been working on my own, mindfulness. So this is an opportunity to make 90. I heard Chadwick say 95 people. So I'm hoping to leave with 94 friends.
There you go. Look at you. All right. One thing that you never want to see from an umpire on the field. What is it? I will pick names if you don't pipe up. Let's start with Mike. He was introduced first, so he gets to go first.
I'm okay. Everybody here?
You bet.
All right. So I guess the one thing that would be, discouraging as a coach would probably be the unwillingness to have a conversation.
All right. Next.
I can go next.
There you go. You've got to talk. It really is how this works. So it's okay.
I think for me, I know you were joking at the start about how this is my personal nightmare, but it almost is a little bit for me. Growing up, I was always very intimidated by umpires. And now as I'm a coach, I feel like I've sort of carried some of that angst with me when I interact with umpires. So just to build a little bit on what Mike said, I think having conversations as the game is about to begin is really helpful. So we can kind of establish that rapport, whether it's in the meeting, the pregame meeting, or just whenever. I just think that's like so helpful that we can talk to them and they're not sort of on their own little island away from everyone. I know that I really encourage my athletes that I coach, the younger ones, to talk to the umpires, even if it's just like to ask them how their day's going or just something really simple. So they really hopefully that's okay with the umpires that are in this room. They don't find that really annoying, but I just feel like if they see them more as humans and not these like robots that are judging their every move and they're going to call them out and it's going to be horrible. I just think that it'll help them humanize, the umpires. And then as they get older and they become coaches, they'll be able to have, better relationships with them and see them in a different way than maybe I was trained to. Now I'm opening up more. I'm in this room with you now and I'm really grateful to be here. But for me, I think that's what I would really stress is just having those little conversations so that we can meet each other as humans who both love the sport of softball and, we both want the same thing. So that would be my thing.
Fantastic. Mr. Searle or Mr. Scott.
Yeah, and to pick up on Elissa, I really am grateful to be here. I'm really flattered with the opportunity. This is my second Blue convention, so I think I went to the first one in Kitchener. I was an umpire, and then one thing they didn't ask what we like about umpires. One thing that I've noticed that athletes and coaches are really picky on is getting the calls right, and that was an area of opportunity for me in my umpiring career. I wasn't very good, so I found a different way to contribute to the game. And I think to me that's I hate to echo Elissa, but I think that's the best way of looking at it. I think Kathy Strom, who was an umpire, and I'm pretty sure it was the '96 Olympics. She wrote an article in a coach's book that I read, and it said it was the same joke that Chadwick made right off the hop. He said umpires and coaches have to work together, but they might not like each other, and they fundamentally have different roles. And I think to me, when umpires and coaches recognize that they're at the same place, but they have different roles and different responsibilities, then I think everyone has a more pleasant experience. And I think the thing that bothers me the most about umpires is sometimes, and it's not often, but sometimes I kind of get the feeling that they feel that they're doing you a favor to be here. And I get kind of triggered when I hear umpires say, well, on my game or on my field, or I get kind of triggered when they say, well, I don't like that particular rule. It's like, well, like they made a rule book, and I think the expectation is that whether you like a rule or don't like a rule, it's the reasonable expectation that we enforce the rules that are there. And I think for me, and I'm totally mindful that we don't have enough umpires, and I'm totally mindful that there's a lot of challenges. But I think if we approach it as, hey, look, we're all happy to be here. We're all looking forward to a positive experience, because coaches go through a great amount of training to be coaches, and they go through professional development the same way umpires do. I'm always jealous about the Blue Convention because the umpire seems to have a lot more fun than we do with our coach development. But the athletes are training and the coaches are training. So if you're there, like, let's have a lot of fun. And the athletes are there, the coach is there, the umpires are there. So it's 3 participants with various roles. But let's all make sure we keep in our mind that it's an enjoyable experience. And when you guys start the game, you say play ball. It's not let's go to work. So I think, to me, if we keep that in our mind and we have an enjoyable experience and we're all there to have fun, I think it makes it a much more pleasant environment.
All right, I will not accuse Scott of trying to sneak in about 4 answers. To one thing, he managed to get 4 different things, but that's okay. I think the one thing that I did see across all 4 answers, though, is communication. That was by far the most common theme that all 3 of our coaches brought up is, and it's not so much that, it was like a lack of communication really is, from Scott mentioning, treating it like you're not happy to be there, you're not conveying that you're pleased to be on the field. Elissa saying, like, separating themselves from the field. Mike saying, and Mike as well, is, it's really being able to communicate. So that's the first question. And one of the really things we're going to jump off of is communication. And the second question is, what's one thing you do like? And you can't just say the opposite of what you said you didn't like. I mean, that's not allowed. And you can be one specific instance, you saw something on the field, you thought that was fantastic, or it's just an overall thing that you really appreciate from umpires. We'll go in reverse order this time.
I don't want to get in trouble, but
absolutely get in trouble.
You'll friggin' throw me out of here. But I love when umpires love the game. And whether that means they played the game or coached the game or are just real fans of the game, I really enjoy conversation with umpires who really know the game. And the last Canadian Championship I was at, I coached Elissa's team, and we were in Newfoundland, and the supervisors were Clinton and Daryl, and they were wonderful. And we had a wonderful conversation. Sometimes we didn't see things the same way they did, but the conversations were wonderful because I knew their hearts were in the right spot and they wanted the right thing. And I think, and to me, I love umpires who love the game. And I had a similar situation, I'm picking on Clinton now, at the Canada Games in 2017, where we had a conversation. He said, I know exactly what you saw. I know exactly what you're looking for. And here's what I saw. It's great. It's a wonderful. So I love when umpires know the game and love the game.
Excellent. Elissa?
So Scott a little bit stole what I was going to say, but I was going to say that I can always really tell when the umpires want to be there as opposed to they feel like they need to be there or they want to make a little bit of extra money, which I understand is like a big motivation also for that. But you can really tell, like, if they want to be there and they're interacting with the people who are involved in the sport, they're just like taking time to go and explain something to someone when they didn't have to do that. Sometimes I find that really helpful. Like if they'll go and talk to an athlete or they'll let an athlete know how they can improve their positioning. I've seen umpires talk to my catcher. I've seen umpires, like, I just find that's great because they want to grow and develop the sport as well. You can tell they're not just there to, get their paycheck at the end of the day and take off. Like they really care about the sport. So I think that's really wonderful. And another thing that I love seeing is young umpires, especially female ones, because I know in Ontario, we don't have very many of them. But I just love seeing them grow and make mistakes, but be in an environment where they can make mistakes and have, the coaches be respectful and the more veteran umpires really training them. I just think that's really wonderful. And it gives me hope for the future that we'll have even more umpires. I know that's kind of a struggle right now. So that's just one thing that I really also like seeing with the umpires when we're playing.
Excellent. Mike?
For the slow pitch side of things, we have I guess, a little bit different circumstance of having the different associations and stuff to play in. And it's for me and my teams and stuff like that, we always enjoy playing with the Blues, just due to their professionalism, their demeanor on the field. It's not necessarily just a guy that's on the field to get his game fee and then on to the next game so he could get his next game fee, etc. So for us, it's a real, it's what makes the Softball Canada tournaments or the local provincial association tournaments that we play in the most prestigious for us.
Oh, I love that answer. I mean, yeah, that's really cool that you feel that when you get the Softball Canada umpires there. And I think, so what we've seen from our two questions, if I summarize correctly, is communication and love for the game. Those are like two things that not only are there things that coaches want, but I think it's also something we can all agree that we share. Like if you're coaching, you're giving up a ton of time from your life to go out and essentially make somewhere between 12 and 16 other people better at softball. And you don't get a lot back. I mean, I don't think I see you guys all sitting in giant palatial estates from your coaching salaries. It's not super lucrative. But, and same with umpires. We put in a ton of time. Yes, we get some money, but it's not as grand as many think, at least in some aspects. So, given that we all share a love of the game, and we're happy to be there, the question now comes, how do we move forward as an umpire and / coaching group to better improve how we communicate on the field? That's the big question. Do we still have to act as adversaries, or is there a different type of relationship that we can exist in?
You throwing that out there for them?
I am throwing it out there, but also I think we're going to talk about a couple things as we get forward, like how to do that. And I think Frankie's got a big one that she likes to start with, and it actually starts at the game. It's the beginning of the game. And Frankie, do you want to take it from here? Because I think hopefully you know where I'm going.
Yeah, sure.
I was going to say, you went from facilitator to philosopher pretty quick there. Like that shifted. Whoa.
Scott does that.
I had too much.
Sorry, Frankie.
Okay.
No, I'm ashamed.
Well, I just want to reiterate that I really do appreciate that both questions drew out the communication theme. And I'm really going to be eternally optimistic that the pandemic has hopefully created an environment where whoever thought that we might actually step onto a diamond and be grateful to be there, because we've had almost 2 seasons of not being able to be there. So I'm hopeful that like the whole mindset of everyone will be a little bit different, because when you take something for granted and it's just always there and then it's like taken away, that maybe we will enter into our games with a bit of a different mindset. So, but I do, I like to stress that the pregame meeting is really important. And Elissa, you mentioned this in your answer to question 1. Like, what is it about the pregame meeting? And what the reason I like to talk about it so much is our level 1s and 2s and 3s spend a lot of time, and even our 4s, it doesn't matter what level you are, when you're at home, you are officiating the same leagues, the same teams, the same diamonds all the time. And I think there's a level of complacency that sets in. And sometimes we think we don't really need to have that little chat before the game. And Elissa, I just loved your answer, because I think we as a fraternity sometimes think about, we go into the game thinking that something may happen and it might not be great and there's going to be a confrontation. And I don't know if I've ever thought that a coach might be nervous to come and talk to me. So just wondering if we could chat a little bit about like that, setting the tone before the game, that pregame meeting. Why is it important to you? What kinds of things do you want the official to talk about? What sets the tone for the game? What don't you want them to do? What irritates you? Elissa, since you brought it up, maybe I'll start with you.
Sure. I think for me, being a female coach, I find the pregame meetings just so important. First of all, to establish that I'd like to be the one that the umpire speaks to. And then also, it's tough. I find one thing that I've been finding really difficult is to get the attention of the umpires. So I'm, not very tall and my voice isn't very loud. So sometimes it's hard for me where I have to call time like 7 or 8 times as I'm like screaming to get out. And at that point, I'm already out at, like next to the pitcher at that point. But I think for me, it would just be nice if potentially the umpires could acknowledge in this meeting that, okay, it's a female coach and they could look out for me a little bit. Like they could know that just be a little more mindful that I won't be able to get your attention the same way Scott would be able to get everyone's attention. So I think just like having that, I would be so, I'd just be so, I'm trying to think of the word. I'd just be, it would mean a lot to me for umpires just to do that one small thing, which I know doesn't seem like a big deal, but I think for a lot of female coaches, it would make the difference. And yeah, for me in that meeting, it's just important to have that connection and the acknowledgement that like, come and talk to me. Cause I do find that a little frustrating at times when I'll go out for the play conference. And then if there's something that needs to be communicated to the head coach, they'll go and see someone else. It's not always men, but in a lot of cases it is. And I just know that that's like a frustration that female coaches have. I'm hearing really good things in other provinces that there are a lot of female coaches, but I know in Ontario, it's still not something that's it's not equitable yet. So I just think like those little interactions are so important for us as female coaches. And that I think it'll just go a long way in helping us feel confident and feel like we belong. We're just unfortunately predisposed to think that like, this isn't really an environment where I belong in. I grew up with all male coaches. I mostly was umpired by men. So it's already kind of like this preset mindset that I have that I'm in a place where I'm not really supposed to be. And I really think that those small things, we would just be so grateful for those little small acknowledgements and changes that could happen during the pregame meeting. And I think that would make a big difference in the long run for female coaches.
All right. Yeah. So for everybody, something to think about, and just to really boil down what Elissa said, like make sure when you walk onto the field, you know who the head coach is. Just figure it out. You know, sometimes you might have to look to see what's going on, but make sure you always know who the head coach is. And it's just important. That's just good diamond etiquette. You always want to know who's running the team. Which,
like, such a small thing, but that's part of the reason why you have the pregame meeting, because if you don't have it, then you don't even know who the representative is. And I'm not just saying that, but Elissa, you also, you know, it's not like you look probably a lot older than your players either, right? Like, I'm just saying, I mean, so you might not be wearing a uniform, but if there's other people on the bench who also aren't wearing a uniform, you might not necessarily stand out as the representative for the team. So thank you for that. Sorry, Scott, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add and to more talking to our umpires and this talk is, you know, the pregame meeting, we talk about pregame meeting, and we all kind of go like when we stand around the plate. But that's, to me, not necessarily like the pregame meeting as much. I mean, it's part of the pregame meeting, but the pregame meeting can include when you go to the dugouts to check bats and helmets, or when you just come onto the field. It's all that first interaction you have with the coaches, you know. And a little tip I went through it just this spring was I walked over to a diamond where we had Mike Rennie, a lookalike coach, and then two women. And I didn't know who the head coach were. They're from a team I've never seen before. And I just threw out a question to see who would hopefully answer first, and so I could start to discern who the head coach was, just so I knew who to interact with. So, but yes, pregame meeting is just really from the moment you get on the field until you say play ball.
Scott.
Yeah, I see Justin's question there. I think it's a really good one. I saw two questions there. So I think the first one was from Les and the second one's from Justin. Can you be too personable? And I see Justin is just not a head coach. So truthfully, with the Canada Games team, we're not going to send our head coach. I'm not going to go to the plate meeting. It's not a lot. And I mentioned that to Scott, I think, when we planned this, and he said sometimes umpires can perceive it as a lack of respect. And I think, and truthfully, it's not. I think that comes down to what I answered at first. I think if we all recognize the roles you have to do. So because I was not a very good umpire, I recognize that part of the umpire's job is to check bats and helmets. So when they're hanging out checking bats and helmets, it's an opportunity to say hello and chat. And I think I hope anyway that umpires appreciate that I know that, and we can have a conversation while they do it. But I also hope that umpires appreciate that if the game starts at 6, we've scheduled 60 minutes of prep time for that game, because we need the athletes to perform in the first inning. So if I'm hitting fly balls to the outfielder and someone's hitting ground balls to the infielders and someone's working on the pitcher, then our expectation is that we get all of that time to prepare. So when umpires start looking at their watch and saying, hey, can we get going a little early? And hey, what's going on? And these types of things, they're all indicators to me. It's like, those are all kind of flashpoints to me. It's like, hey, we're not all here for the same reason. It's like the game says 6, like, let's start at 6. So those are types of things I think that can start to eat away at a environment where we're all having a positive and gun. And I get it. In a tournament environment, we have to get games going. I totally respect all those things, but those are things I think that are indicators that, and I totally agree with Scott and Frankie. I think the very rarely have those first interactions with an official not borne out. When you meet someone, it's like, this is going to be wicked. We're having a really fun day. You're usually right. And you meet someone's like, uh-oh, they're usually right there too. So I think that first impression is critical.
Right. I want to just comment on what Scott said. I'm really okay with when they send non-head coaches to the plate. I think what I was talking about is when we're over there trying to interact with players and stuff, and the coaches, aren't hitting fly balls, aren't working with pitchers, and they're just basically hiding from umpires and not willing to kind of engage and start that communication process. That's the part I don't like. Right. I mean, if you're doing stuff with your team, that's your job. That's what you should do. But when you're just, I'm too cool, I'm just going to, stand off the side and not do anything right now just to avoid talking with you, that's not always the most awesome.
And it's also good to hear for people, Scott, that the pregame meeting isn't necessarily as important for you in that relationship building. It's already started. It's already there. It's you're focused on other things. And there are other opportunities for officials to take to build that rapport with you. That's good for people to know. And it's not a sign of disrespect if the head coach doesn't come necessarily. They're just focused on other things. In some jurisdictions, actually, at the international level, because of the formality of the pregame meeting, the head coach is expected to be there. But at nationally and what we're doing, the tournaments that we're at, not necessarily an expectation. So, Mike, what about you?
Well, so for me, I guess the pregame, especially on the slow pitch side of things, I've been around for quite a while. And so I know most of the umpires, whether it be locally or at a nationals. So from that aspect, it's, I guess for me, more so than some, maybe a little more ceremonial. However, there is that opportunity to speak, and understand, get an idea of where the umpires are at on that particular day, see if they're maybe not in the best of mood, see if how you have the conversation with the other team, etc. So I like the pregame meetings for those reasons. Some of the things that are important that we talked about, you asked why it's important. Again, in any park, there's always a little bit of differences. It's good to understand if there's any ground rules and stuff like that we need to understand. But yeah, other than that, I think most of the pregame meetings and discussions with umpires it's more on that relationship building and understanding exactly, where they might be at that day, right? Like I said, I've been around, I know most of them, and some days, if they've come in from another game and they've had a bad game before because, maybe they're not as, jovial as they normally are, or maybe they're happier than they are because they got to run somebody out. I don't know. Whatever makes an umpire happy normally.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. I think I want to go back to, Scott mentioned it quickly, it was a question from Les, is can umpires be too personable? What do you guys think? Is there too much friendliness? Can umpires be too friendly, too personal? Is there a line you want to maintain?
Truthfully, the answer is probably yes, but I think we've got some flexibility. So I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time worrying about that as my glib and maybe smart answer. I think truthfully, I've heard you say it, Scott. I don't like quoting you, especially to you, but I've heard you say primarily it's looking for nice people. And I think if you're a nice person, you're being yourself, you're going to be fine. I think but I think when I used to be an umpire, I heard someone, I can't remember who it was, but someone said, if everyone's telling you your strike zone is low, it's low. It doesn't matter if you think it's low, it's low. And I would say the same if you're often finding yourself in situations where people are are feeling more tense than you're used to, and if you're saying, I don't understand why everyone feels tense around me, maybe that's an opportunity to be friendly, I think is my kind of glib answer.
All right, the rest of you, can you be too friendly? Is there too personable?
I think that you can be friendly and professional at the same time. So yeah, I think that both those things can exist together. And I agree with Scott. I think we're far from the point where people are too friendly. I feel like it's the other way, where maybe we're a little bit too separated, like the umpires are over here and the coaches are over here. So I do think we could maybe have a little bit more, let our guards down a little bit more, but still remain professional and have, a better relationship between the two parties.
I think we talked about this in our pre-call. It comes down a lot to me to there just being respect between the parties, right? That you can be both professional and friendly as long as you both respect each other's positions, right? And understand what each person's role is at that time and place.
No, I think speaking of friendly, there's just a wide variety of opinions about how we address one another on the diamond as well, right? Like if I've umpired, I've actually never had the chance to umpire Mike, but I mean, I know everybody in the slow pitch world knows you, but I think for me, I would, my natural place would be to refer to you as Mike, because I bet you we've had conversations, but maybe some coaches don't like that. Do the three of you have any preference for having officials address you by your first name? Or I'm seeing you shake your heads.
No.
Okay.
No,
Elissa?
I think the play conference is a really great time where you can introduce yourself, and then we've met each other. So at that point, like, great, if you want to call me by my first name, I think that's wonderful. I don't know of any coaches that really don't like that, but
My experience, if they're usually calling out your number, it's a bad thing.
Fair enough.
I do see a question from Mitch here that I'm interested in. It says, when coaches talk about umpire consistency among yourselves as coaches, what does that conversation sound like? Actually, I guess the other way to look at it is, do you spend, I guess probably because we're all umpires, we assume that you like talking about us. Do you guys actually spend that much time considering the umpire, or talking about umpires, or is it something that it's kind of it occurs during the game, and after you leave the game it kind of leaves your mind?
No, it's something for me. It's something I think about a lot, because I think there's such a big role, and I think the role of the umpire is critical and essential. And I remember, again, I wasn't a very good umpire, but I watched the Olympics, and one thing I thought was really cool about Genevieve in her first game, I think the first game, she called an obstruction, and I think which would have been the first run. And I remember thinking to myself, like, oh my goodness, she's like, that's gutsy. And I remember in my own experience as an umpire, I remember, is that a leadoff or not a leadoff? Is that an obstruction? Is that not obstruction? Is that interference or not interference? And again, because I wasn't very good, I'd let the situation and the intensity and all those things play into my decision-making process. And the expectation from, especially as you get to a higher level, the pitchers know what spot they're hitting. So if we're hitting a spot and it's a strike in the first, it ought to be a strike in the seventh. And if you call a leadoff in the first, you ought to call a leadoff on the seventh. And teams absolutely know. I've absolutely been involved in conversations where you say, this particular umpire won't call leadoffs. That particular umpire will give us a foot outside. And I've worked with umpires who'll give us a foot outside, and you might think, oh my God, that's brutal. But then it's like, no, a foot outside in the first, a foot outside in the fifth, and a foot outside in the seventh. That's not bad. Like, maybe if they're in the Olympics, not good, because it would look bad on the screen. But from our point of view, if it's a strike, it's a strike, it's a strike, and that's great. So fill your boots. So I think to me that's fantastic. And I think those lopsided things, it gets really tough on umpires where if a strike all of a sudden is not a strike for the opponent, managing those conversations and managing those things, I think is something that's very difficult for an official to do.
So Mike, does the word consistency come up with when you're talking about umpires? And if it does, what does that sound like?
Yeah, well, so I mean, I wouldn't say so much it's conversation between coaches, unless there happens to be a time in the game where the two coaches happen to get together and they're both throwing needles at the ump for good fun or something like that. But other than that, I think more than anything, and Scott touched on it, I think it's more part of our tool bag as coaches to be able to help our players. So, the pitcher, like, hey, this guy, this umpire tends to give a little bit higher arc, or he tends to, be a little bit tighter in the zone. Things like that. I think that allows us to help our players more so than to, converse with other coaches about it. But certainly, knowing who the umpires are, or seeing that, when they walk up to the game, if we don't happen to know who they are beforehand, it's certainly part of our pregame huddle and discussion on some things at times.
All right.
Elissa.
For me, I would say I don't have as good of a memory as Scott does. So he's very good to know, like, don't you remember 7 years ago in this game, this is what happened and it was this umpire. So I don't remember that stuff so much. But for me, a really big thing, and with other coaches I've spoken to, is I don't remember so much the little plays, but I do remember how the umpire made me feel, whether it was as an athlete or as a coach. And that's something that stuck with me. So if ever there were situations that I felt were unfair, or maybe the umpire spoke to me in a cross way or in a way that I felt was undeserving, and maybe I did deserve it, I don't know. But I remember those things. So those are the things I remember. And those umpires, I can remember exactly what they look like. Some of them I may not know their names, but when they walk into the diamond, I for sure remember I had a very negative interaction with this umpire. So, and that for sure is something that I'll carry with me. And I'm sure a lot of coaches are like that as well. But in terms of like, which did they get this call right, or are they more consistent this way or not? That's not really something that I'd say that I talk about frequently, but for sure I'll remember how I felt in certain situations with different umpires.
Interesting.
All right, next question, and we got good questions, so Frankie and I are just going to stay out of the way. And this comes from Lynn, and Scott addressed it a little bit, but like, as coaches, in a lopsided game, what are you telling your bench? What are you expecting? Are you expecting anything from an umpire? Are you trying to work with the umpire? If you're down or up 12-0 or down 12-0, are you handling the umpire or talking to him any differently or expecting anything different? Or do you still, like Scott said, you want the same zone in the first and the fifth and if it's lopsided, it's not getting past the fifth. Do you understand? Is there something to the zone being changed a little bit to help the game get towards conclusion? Because I think we've all decided, or at that point, most people know that the game's probably over, even though it's not finished. Let's go with Mike first. Yeah, Mike. Yep.
Mike,
Scott.
go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things when a game gets away from you, either to the good or to the bad. I think everybody just wants to get off the field, including the teams, right? Nobody likes beating up. There's no value in beating up on teams like that. There's no value in getting beat up. So I think we hope everybody can just get through the game and not get injured. But there are always those teams on the other side that will play it out and play it hard, and I think that makes it hard for umpires. That they're trying to get things moving along so we can get everybody a breather and clear their mind before their next one. And yeah, it's a tough situation. I'm glad there's mercy rules in place that there are, but sometimes they're it's a bad situation, unfortunately.
Scott?
I think I see it a bit differently, and I think it's a challenge for the umpire, and I'd be extremely reluctant to give any type of advice on how to handle it because it's such a challenging situation. But I think my first thought is, I don't want to be rude to Elissa because I know she runs the pitching program, but pitching's not as good as it used to be. So a 7-run lead is not a safe lead in a lot of events. So I'd be extremely reluctant to have an umpire say, well, the game's over. It's like, no, our pitching's not good enough to hold on to this lead. So I think that's a knowledge piece that I think is really important. I think the other thing I think about is is for umpires, particularly who are working at development levels. And I'm mindful looking at the names on this list. That's not the case for everyone. But I think if you're working at U14 or U15, U13, the kids are learning the sport. So if the kids are learning the sport, it's incumbent on, they have to know the rules. Like if I'm learning how to play checkers or chess and it's like, you got a big lead. Go ahead. You can take my king. It's like, or I'm learning how to play, poker, or I'm learning how to play blackjack, or I'm going to play crazy eights. It's like, you're way up. Don't worry about it. So I think those things make it difficult for kids to learning the rules. And I think that those are challenges. On the flip side, though, if I'm coaching adults and it's 8-0 in the first, I totally agree with Mike. I want out of there as bad as everyone. So I think it's a hard answer, but I think there's a lot of variables. And to me, truthfully, I would say that would distinguish a 3 from a 4 and a 4 from a 5. People who really understand that role and participate. But I'd hate to give a firm answer on it.
I think I would say, to me, lopsided is not 7-0, like a 7-run spread. I was talking about, to me, lopsided is 14, where you're like, you've got, not only do you have the run rule, but you've got what I would call a healthy buffer on top of that. I absolutely agree that, I've seen more and more in the last few years, a game that's 6-0 in this third that if I'd done that 20 years ago, that's over. Now 6-0 in the third probably means it's 8-6 for the other team in the fourth, right? So I'm not thinking there. I'm thinking more when, or opportunities when a team is giving up, say, 14 runs in the second inning, like, are you as a coach thinking, hey, maybe we should lead off, or maybe we should, that kind of, those type of games, when you get that lopsided.
I for sure said to umpires, hey, look, if you want to, I'm seeing a lot of strikes you're missing when we're hitting. If you want to start calling them, that would be awesome. I've seen, or, I think our second hitter might lead off here. And if you want to get them, that'd be awesome too. Cause I totally agree. So I've for sure said that.
Elissa, your thoughts on lopsided, or are you just?
I think I agree. For me, the only time I've ever been frustrated is when umpires lack consistency. And I think that no matter I think like Mike said, if a team's getting pummeled, even I coach a U15 and we've been at both ends of the spectrum. We've had games where we've been way up and we've had games where we've been way down. And I really think that, we kind of want to wave the white flag in some cases and put us out of our misery. So I think if we stay consistent and that's a part of the game, right? And the athletes need to learn that as well, that sometimes, we're still going to call the game the way it's supposed to be called. I don't think there should be any modifications made to strike zones or modifications made to calls that are safer out. Like, I think that for me, when I've been in situations where I've played and I've been down and the umpires have done that, I felt like that was like, my feelings got hurt. I'm like, you know what? We don't need your pity. Like, let's just get out of here. We know we're losing. We know this isn't going our way, and that's okay. That's part of the sport too, right? So I think in order for the kids to understand that, we have to also be consistent as coaches and as umpires, and to say, like, if you're down by 14, we're still calling the strike zone the way that it's supposed to be, and we're not going to give you any freebies. Like, that's what it is. We've lost the game, not a big deal. Let's just, try again tomorrow. Like, it's really not the end of the world. And I think that if we make those adjustments, we sort of teach them that that's how the world will be, and it's not. So I think it's just better if we stay consistent and we just call it like it is, and that's what it is.
Excellent.
I think that's great, because I think some umpires may feel that they're doing people a favor, but in the end, it's also really hard to have different strike zones for different teams, just because one seems to be So I appreciate that commentary. We have another interesting question. There have been many recent posts about violence towards umpires in social media. And if you combine that with the fact that we're, like, globally, officials in all sports are sort of down in numbers, for young officials who can't really practice until they're actually in game situations, what are some ways that coaches, players, parents can help to develop and retain umpires that are working their games?
So first and foremost for me, I can't speak to the children's side of things, but I think you set the tone for your team because they see how you act. And so I think you have to have some ground rules for your team on what is expected of them when it comes to being on the team. And right from the beginning, any team that I have. The players have to respect the opponents, respect the officials, respect their teammates. Without that respect and without that, so I think it starts with us as coaches. We can be a good leader and show them, it's okay to disagree with an umpire, but you don't have to go out there and embarrass them or be demeaning to them and stuff like that. You can have an adult discussion and agree to disagree. I think that's a really good tone to set. Other than that, if I ever had a player that is abusive to an official, as adults, as kids, it doesn't matter. I would treat them the same. They come out of the game. They may not play a game after that, right? Depending on the situation and how egregious it is. But I've always kind of, it's tough with adult males to keep them under control at time. But I think my respect for the officials is conveyed onto my players, and they know what's expected of them. So part two to your question, Frankie, would be, to me, sport is a privilege always. Somebody does something like that, they don't have the privilege of sport anymore, in my opinion. One-time offender is, you're done. If it's physical like that,
Right.
like the most recent one.
Right. So, I mean, what you're really, we need the support of the leagues to actually help, have systems in place to address. I think there are places in nationally where maybe there aren't mechanisms in place for those kinds of situations to have sanctions placed against the individuals who are involved. But I love that, like, the coaches set the tone for the team, right? So, Scott?
Yeah, I can empathize. I remember Elissa talked about size now, and I'm tall, and my size has increased in two different ways, and I'll let everyone's mind go there. But when I was an umpire, I was 14 years old, and I umpired because I loved softball. It's my favorite sport. And my first year umpiring, a coach sent a parent behind the screen to shout at me, and I wouldn't take my mask off between innings. I was crying so much, and the other team quit the game because it got so intense. And the coach followed me home on my bike, and he drove home after me, and I was on my bike, and I was 14. So that's always stuck in my mind. I think that's perhaps one of the reasons why I've always had a great deal of respect for what happens. And I do a lot, as Scott mentioned in the introduction, I do a fair amount of coach developing clinics. And one of the things we cover in that is the rules. And we talk about the rules, and I've designed a Kahoot quiz. So we show some clips, mostly for interference obstruction, and we show the coaches, and their answers are, I would say, 50% wrong. And I would say the most common question from coaches, can you show me that again? And I always make the case, like, look, the umpires don't get a chance to show it, to see it again. And their expectation is that they know the rules perfectly. So if you don't know the rules when you get a break to sit it in the clinic and you want to see it again, I always say, I better not friggin' see you people shouting at umpires because you don't know the friggin' rules yourself. And the other thing I think that I always try to amplify as coaches is, particularly, I think, with respect, Frankie and Genevieve and Scott, I think if you're at an international event, the expectation you get the call right. But for the vast majority of us who aren't doing that, we're all learning. I'm developing as a coach. I'm doing professional development as a coach frequently. I'd include this as part of it. A lot of the athletes we work with make mistakes at a way higher rate than I'd like them to. So they're making tons of mistakes. Coaches are making tons of mistakes, and umpires are going to make mistakes as well. And I think the awareness of that is, don't shout at each other when someone's trying to do a difficult thing and they're not getting it always right. So I think all those things would help frame those conversations, because to me, it's just, if you're shouting at someone, you're just a clown. And if you hit someone, you're a criminal. Like, there's no real, I don't think that's a sport expectation. To me, you're a criminal, and we have a criminal justice system for that.
All right.
Elissa, do you want to add anything?
Yep.
Sure. I think for me, just the big thing is, I think that these types of conversations and initiatives are really going to help kind of mend that. Because I do think that I talked about the piece about not really seeing umpires as human when I was younger. And I'm sure a lot of kids are like that too. And a lot of coaches probably grow into that role as well. So I think these conversations that we're having between coaches and umpires, which is we're both understanding each other's roles differently and better, I know at the Women's Summit that we had a few weeks ago, Terry Klein was there and she spoke to us, and I found that really helpful. At the University of Ottawa, we're super lucky because we have Sarah Eve, who's really close to us. So our young female athletes get to see a younger female umpire doing an excellent job in our games. And I think it kind of inspires them to be like, hey, I could do that too someday. And I think the more we interact with each other as coaches, I think the more respect we'll have for each other's job and how difficult it is to be a coach and how difficult it is to be an umpire and the different intricacies of all those things. And I do think that I think we should do this more often. I've never been in a room with so many umpires before, and you guys, like it's been a great experience. It hasn't been as scary as I thought that it might be, but I just think the more we do that, the more respect we'll each have for each other. And then you'll see like there'll be way fewer instances of that happening, because if you get to know someone, you're not gonna do that. It's impossible. Like Scott said, if those people are criminals and that's what they're doing, then that's what they're doing. But I think in most cases, when you understand where someone's coming from, you have just so much more respect for them, and you'll treat them with that kind of respect on the softball diamond and outside of the softball diamond as well.
Very good. So we're wrapping up here. We're coming to the end of our time. We don't want to keep them all day long because I think we probably could. So we won't do that. What I did want to do is just kind of run through a quick summary of things that I've kind of heard through the conversation, and then see if any of our coaches want to elaborate or just kind of chime in on anything that I might have missed. So really, communication, treating each other as humans, understanding where we're coming from, approaching the game with professionalism and humility, being willing to have like an open and honest dialogue with coaches and have between the two of you, respecting each other's jobs. And I think it ultimately comes down to is just showing respect for that role of what each person is attempting to accomplish on the diamond, and going from there. Did I miss anything, coaches? Did I get it?
That's a dangerous question, Scott.
Yeah.
I think if I could just add one thing that I heard loud and clear was it's very evident what attitude the official is coming onto the diamond with. So I would really like to stress that to all of my brothers and sisters out there who are officials. It's really evident what attitude you have when you walk onto the field. The coaches and the players can pick up on that.
Absolutely. And Frankie's much more elaborate than I am. I will just say, like Mike mentioned earlier, or Scott mentioned earlier, just start when you walk onto the field with the intention of being nice and kind of going from there. It really is an easy way to get through the game, and it makes things pretty good on the field. So I want to thank Scott and Mike and Elissa for spending so much time with us and part of this conversation. I see Scott's posted his email and phone number in the chat room so we can all prank him. Continue this conversation whenever you want, which is fantastic. And I really do echo Elissa's thoughts that the more we talk about this and the more we spend time with each other, the better our relationships are going to get on the field. Frankie?
I'll just echo that. Thank you so much for the three of you for coming. We don't really engage in these kinds of conversations very often. This is in my time, so in 22 years, this is the third time we've had a coach umpire kind of session. And so thank you so much for coming.
And on just for myself, I really appreciate the work you guys did to set it up, and I really genuinely admire the work that umpires do to develop. I think I'm always totally jealous. I've said it a million times at coaches clinics. Like, I think it's because coaches are competitive, but I really admire the camaraderie and the congeniality that umpires have and how much fun they have. So I really think that's fantastic, and really appreciate the invitation. I had a wonderful time, and thanks a lot for having us.
Excellent.
I just want to say thanks again. It's a real honor to join. Again, it's been said a couple different times, but I think this is something that should happen more often. 3 times in 22 years. I don't see why you wouldn't do this annually now. It's great.
Thanks for volunteering, Mike.
I'm sure you can find prettier guys to look at than me every year, but I'm always willing to sit in if you guys need me.
Mike, I'm still here. That proves your theory wrong. So.
The other option is Carneros.
Nobody likes him. Yeah.